Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another great interview for the Virtual Business Summit on foundations that we're doing. And today we're talking to Bill. Now, he's got a very specific and really interesting thing that he does. He has a radio station that he put together in the modern age, and they specialize in working, it's all business related. And I'll let him tell you more about it, but it's IBGR. IBGR. So, welcome, Bill. Tell us a little bit about the radio station, what you're doing, and who you are.
Okay, well, this is going to be easy because it's a Bill talking to a Bill. And so
Absolutely.
IBGR is our call sign. We're on the internet as opposed to being on terrestrial radio. However, we use the call sign because we run this as a radio station. So there's a lot of internet radio out there that runs on a different format. What we did is we adopted what is a standard terrestrial format. In other words, you get in your car, you turn on radio, up it goes. And so IBGR is our call sign, but it stands for the International Business Growth Radio. And if I was like going to the FCC in the United States, I would be assigned a call sign. And the letters is just an alphabet soup. It doesn't know what you don't know what it means. So IBGR.network is our name. It is our URL, and it is our broadcast frequency. So instead of saying, like I did in the old days, you're listening to 8:20 a.m. WNTW, you're listening to IBGR, heard around the world on the internet. And so that's what we built. Now, the concept behind this, a brief history, is that I'm not a radio professional in that I didn't come from radio. I spent the majority of my life, my early career was spent in engineering and marine sciences. And then don't ask me how I got into the business consulting industry, I just did. And I spent about 2/3 of my career doing large corporate consulting. And then the last third, I focused on small businesses. And I realized the challenge that we have, and Bill, I'm sure it's the same one you have. If you're trying to coach or consult to small businesses, it is a tough population to reach, because it's like herding cats. There's no when you deal with a corporation and they got 10,000 employees, they've already organized it for you.
Mhm.
In this particular case, 10,000 companies to try to reach is difficult. And so I was doing business turnarounds in my last third of my other career, and I did a radio station. I was on the air doing a business show, and the general manager got fired because they were unprofitable. And I do turnarounds, so I went, yeah, I'll throw my hat in the ring, and I wound up being general manager. And I came to two conclusions. One, I love the medium. I love the industry. Number two, it is the worst run industry in the world. So being a business consultant, you're going, hey, what a great opportunity. We turned the station around. It was profitable. I had an opportunity to buy it, but I knew what it wasn't worth, and they were asking for too much money. And I went, well, let's just go to the internet. So January of 2020, right before COVID, and of course, nobody knew how that was going to go down, we created the IBGR network. We worked about 3 months on the business plan, and then in April of 2020, we went on the air just as COVID was hitting. I don't know if it helped us. I don't know if it hurt us. It just is. That's just one of the issues in business is sometimes you can have perfect timing, and sometimes your timing is terrible. And so I can't tell you whether it was perfect or not. We went on the air, and originally we didn't have any host. So I did 6 hours of programming a day for 5 days a week, and then we put it around the world because we broke the world into 4 markets. So we have an Australia, New Zealand, Oceania market. We have an Indian market, and then we have Europe, Scandinavia, Middle East, and Africa because they're all kind of contiguous time-wise. And then we have the North American market. So I broadcast 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in North America, and then spread it around the world. So our first week on the air, we had one host, me. We had one listener, our studio engineer, in one country. And so we are in our 30th month of being on the air. We're now in 183 countries. We average 20 to 25,000 listeners a month. And our podcast and our hosts go on the air. It's a live show. Obviously, we record it. We turn it into a podcast. So everything that we do is now a podcast. Not that that was our intention. It just made business sense. And we're approaching, and probably today, we went over 300,000 downloads.
Some of the things that I heard is you broke your radio into 4 different markets so that you could hit the world based on the time that they are there. So that's something I definitely want to go into more.
Okay.
Also, you're breaking the radio apart in the sense of the radio broadcast itself, podcasts, and a few other things. So I want to kind of have that as something we talk about as well. And then talking about 2 other things: the listeners, how that kind of played into, like, how'd you get them, how did that kind of work, and then who maybe are people that you kind of focused on yourself. But then the last thing is also, how are you turning it into that benefit? Because every business, we have to think of, like, how are we converting these people into that dollar sign? Great, people are listening, but how do we get converted into that dollar sign? So that's kind of the fourth thing that I think
Okay.
we would talk about. So going into the first piece, what made you break it into those 4 markets? Because that's a lot of programming to deal with.
Well,
And, how did you go about it?
yeah, it's radio operates off what they call a time clock. So everything you do on the air is time based.
Hmm.
And so, a typical radio station has hard breaks and soft breaks. They typically go about 15 minutes to a segment. Sometimes they go 8. All depends on how many advertisers you have. We didn't have kind of that challenge. We have our own hard breaks, but they're self-imposed. The deal that we had is, if we're going to go global, we had to work off of the global clock. So to give you an example of how we had to design it, the day starts in Australia. The day doesn't start in North America; it starts in Australia. So we said, okay, we got to pick a reference city in that time zone that represents how we're going to manage our time. The business capital of Australia is Sydney. So we said, okay, Sydney is our first reference city. And then we moved over as the sun moves, we had to move with the sun. And so when you look at the workday, because that was kind of how we bounded it, if you got 4 markets and you have 24 hours, the math is simple. You have a 6-hour programming day for the market.
Hmm.
So from 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, Sydney time, our focus is on Oceania. Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Philippines, Taiwan, predominantly because we're not bilingual yet, so everything is in English.
Hmm.
Well, at 2 in the afternoon in Sydney, it's 9:30 in the morning in Mumbai, India.
Hmm.
So now we shift our programming and we focus from 9:30 to 3:30 Mumbai time on India. And you have Pakistan, you have Sri Lanka, you have Bangladesh, but predominantly with 1.4 million people, and probably the best bet for the world's economy in the future is going to be India.
Hmm.
And so we focus on the Indian subcontinent. At 3:30, it's now 10 o'clock in the morning on the prime meridian. And so the prime meridian takes in Scandinavia, United Kingdom, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So we broadcast in their workday from 10 to 4. At 4 o'clock, it is noon here in North America and New York. And so what we do is we basically start our programming day here from 10 to 6. Now, with the time shifts coming up, that's all going to get jumbled, but you want to hear the mess that creates. Changes first, then the United States changes. The good news is, by picking Greenwich Mean Time for the prime meridian, that never shifts the time. And
Hmm.
by India doesn't change its time. It's just on this weird 30-minute out of phase with the world. So then our programming is focused on North America at 6 o'clock in the evening. I don't say we go off the air, but use radio terminology. We go off the air and we shift, because it's 6 in the evening. It's 8 o'clock in the morning in Sydney, and the broadcast day starts over. So
Yeah.
that's why we broke it into those markets. So you have 8 to 2, 9:30 to 3:30, 10 to 4, 12 to 6. Try to get
Mhm.
all our programming in during the business day. But North America being last, our times are dictated by what happens in Sydney and then working our way across the world.
Mhm. Now that's really cool. So I think one of the big questions that comes up for me is, like, so you're gearing your programming towards those areas, um, when they're in them. So what are some things you've run into as far as, like, the way business is different in those different time zones, maybe the different topics that those people would be interested in? Because there's cultural differences, but also different laws and stuff as well with the different areas of how those businesses are run. So how are you handling those differences, and what kind of programming have you kind of put together in those different areas based on the cultural differences, the time differences, the different programming that those areas would enjoy or be interested in?
Well, what we do is we put a structure to the 6 hours. And I'll explain that because it's kind of like a matrix. But
Mhm.
the fundamental piece of that is the host. Is that, and I'll tell you the structure in a second. When we're broadcasting to Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Philippines, we try to have hosts from that area. So, given the structure that we give them, they know how to make that make sense to their market. When we're in the
Mhm.
Indian market, we try to do that. When we're in the European or African, Middle Eastern market, we try to do that. North American market's a little bit easier because I'm here. Uh, so it's the host understanding the nuances of their culture, their business environment, and the government regulations. Now, here's the structure. We use a balanced scorecard a methodology. And a balanced scorecard simply says is that if you want high financial performance out of your company, that's an end result. That's an effect. You can't get financial performance by focusing on it. It is what are the causes that create the effect. And so the way we use the model, we say the financial performance equals operations plus customers plus people, your employees, and then we kind of turn it into math problems. So kind of visualize F equals, and then in parentheses O plus C plus P, and then on the other side the E is outside the brackets. It's the multiplier. It's the executive of the firm. The challenge with most small business owners is that they're glorified technicians, and in the early startup days there isn't a choice. But at some point, the owner's got to pull themselves up the cone because, and anybody that read the E-Myth by Michael Gerber going back about 25 years ago, you know that if you only work in the business and you never work on it, every day is Groundhog Day.
Mhm.
Okay, except you're probably not as funny as Bill Murray. And so
Yeah.
the issue here is that on we try to get the owner to start thinking like an executive of a multi-million-dollar firm. It's not a guarantee that if you think like one, you'll be one. But if you start thinking like one, it becomes a possibility. If you don't, and you're constantly working in the business, 10 years from now, you may be a little bit bigger and you may be making more money, but you will not have grown the company into what you wanted it to be. So given that format, Monday is finance day. Everything that we do on the air is related to finance. The hosts are on, and our hosts are subject matter experts and practicing entrepreneurs. It's not a college program. We don't have people on lecturing. You got a business owner like you talking about how you built your business. And in this particular case, if it's Monday, it's finance day. I have
Mhm.
everything from accountants to CPAs to fractional CFOs on the air. And again, localized to the market. On Tuesday, it's all operations and how do you build the processes that produce the products and services you deliver. You build the back office. Everybody on the air there runs a process-based company. They're mostly consultants in process. Like I've got a lot of people who work in lean manufacturing, and then they talk about how to apply lean to your small business.
Mhm.
On Wednesday, by focusing on customers, we focus on marketing, sales, and service. The same thing. You're running a marketing agency. You might be a host of the show. On Thursday, we have people who are HR experts who run HR companies. And then on Friday, I have a collection of people like yourself on who are talking about the journey that they went through. Now, the other part of the other structure is that's one structure. The
Mhm.
second structure is in a 6 hour segment, we have 1 hour news, and then we have 3 hours that are dedicated, 1 hour is dedicated to startups. In other words, you haven't started or you're very young. So
Mhm.
it'll be finance or operations or, say, marketing for that type of company. Then we have a segment, an hour that's dedicated to growth. How do you scale your business so you can grow into its full potential capacity?
Yeah.
And the third one is around exit. You're looking to sell the business or you're looking to grow by merger or acquisition, or you're crazy like we are and you want to IPO. And so now,
Mhm.
given that structure, we find hosts that are local who can speak to that topic area, but from the perspective of that local market.
Mhm.
So that's how it's a calculus. Trust me, it's a calculus problem to get all the programming right and get the right host in. So I spent a
Yeah.
lot of time talking to prospective hosts because what I want to do is I want to put out the best information possible. And what they are all told is there's two things that you offer to your audience: your insights and any tools or applications. We may do a little theory because I may have to explain, like balance scorecard. I may have to explain that if you haven't come across that. But once that's done in 5 minutes, we're not talking about any theory here. We're talking about, well, how do I apply this tool?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I think it's really cool the way that you guys have put together your programming with such a great structure, which I think speaks to your demographic of business owners as well, because they should be as organized and as dedicated and as structured as you guys are doing. So I really like how you broke that out with the markets, but not, not just the markets, but also how you're doing that programming and how you're hitting those different markets with those cultural differences and those business potential, because the country's different. I like how you were able to overcome that as well. So the next thing I kind of want to go into is, again, how you're breaking it apart now that you're in the modern age, because you can do podcasts and break it into different segments to help market out there. What are the different ways that you're breaking that apart, and then how are you using it?
Okay, so one of the things we do is we produce a listener guide. Now, the idea behind that is the radio station is a do-it-yourself business consulting operation. The way that we put this together is that, and it has to do with, I believe that you and I represent, and your audience represent, the most important community on the planet. 57% of everybody who has a job on planet Earth works for a company with 20 or fewer employees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's about 375 million small business. Of those, about 175 million, English is the primary or secondary language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we look at what do they need. So the first level of the engagement or the relationship is you download the listener guide. You know what challenges you have as the owner. Let's say it's operations. You don't have any back office systems. So then you know that Tuesday is the day that you want to focus in on. Mm-hmm. So if you want to listen to it live, then what you do is you say, okay, I want to listen to R.J. Lewis. And so she, or Crystal Davis. Crystal Davis runs a lean manufacturing business. Her client is predominantly General Motors, but she's really good at saying, you're a small service company. How do I apply these principles to build systems that deliver what you promised the customer with a margin? Because the big thing about operations is you got to deliver the offer with a margin. Mm-hmm. And so as when you look at the listener guide, you can go through there and say, here are the shows I want to listen to, or here are the podcasts that you want to download and listen to at your own convenience. So you can listen on our schedule, or you can listen on demand. So we started with the customer or the audience, the client. I really look at them as clients because I came out of the consulting industry. As clients is, what do I need to do for them so they can self-help? Mm-hmm. So that's one level. We have not instigated or created yet some of the other parts of our offer. So it's a good thing when we get down to number 4 is you got us not complete. You got us in our growth plan, because there's services or offers that we haven't made yet that are in the works, and it's based upon when is it time to deliver that piece of information. All right, so that's number 1. Now, a second client we have is the host. Mm-hmm. And so what the host has, why would you want to be a host on the network? Well, if you think about it, there probably isn't a business owner out there that in the modern age that we're in that doesn't know that they need to produce ongoing dynamic content. Mm-hmm. However you post it, wherever you put it, you got to develop it. You also know that if you don't have a podcast now, you don't exist. It's kind of like 10 years ago, if you didn't have a website or you weren't on social media, you didn't exist. Well, now you have to have a podcast. And so what we do with the host is we say, okay, you got to do this. I don't have to sell you on it. We give you a discipline where you're going to have to do this. And so you sign on for a season, which is a business quarter, 13 weeks. And we're coming up to the end of this quarter, at the end of the month. And in October, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think October 4th, we start season 11. And so you have 13 weeks. You have to put together your show, and I'll talk in a minute about how we help the host decide what they're going to do, because the big thing now becomes ROI. What is your return on investment? But basically, you put together show notes for 13 weeks based upon a curriculum or schedule that you want to portray. You get each hour is broken down into 4 12.5-minute segments. Okay, so you get 52 podcasts. So what we tell a host is that in 90 days, you get 365 days of marketing collateral to use as you deem appropriate. And we basically run inside of our organization a marketing agency. Now, we don't sell marketing as a consulting piece. We use our marketing agency to help our host. And the question we ask them is, what's your intention about being on the air? For some people, it's helping them to close sales. So then the content of what they create, what are the 13 shows going to be about, is overcoming the obstacles that they're having in the sales funnel to use that with their customers. Mm-hmm. And our hosts who have done that have won major contracts, because consider this. There are 3 companies being considered, Bill. You're one of them. Mm-hmm. They get to hear you. They get to see you. Your competitors are probably not being heard and seen. And the fact is, you're on the #1 global business talk and news network around the world. By web ranking, we're #1. That gives you an additional kind of cachet, if I can use that word. And so if you're into sales, your programming is to help you close in the sales funnel. If, on the other hand, your problem is, I don't have enough qualified leads to put in my sales funnel. So then the focus is going to be on marketing, and then your content's going to be around and where you're going to stick it, where you're going to put it. Are you going Facebook? You're going LinkedIn? You're going to use YouTube. How do you get qualified leads in the sales funnel? And that's the focus of the 13 weeks. And then there's a third type of host who's more concerned with their legacy. Mm-hmm. And they want to give back. And what they want to do is they want to establish themselves or enhance themselves as thought leaders and build a following. So based upon where the host is at, that is what we provide to them. Now, what do we have in the wings? We have a membership site that we are going to enact by the end of the year. And with the membership site, what happens there is the listeners that would like to get access to more of the materials will be able to join that. And then instead of just downloading the show notes and listening to the podcast, we talk, like my show, I talk about 1 or 2 tools every show I do. Well, if they become members, they can download the tool. Mm-hmm. Now what we're doing is we're doing a little DIY plus. You want a little more support than listening to a podcast or a radio show and downloading the show notes, then we have it in there. And who's going to help you with that? All the hosts. So now what I've done is I've created a market for the host, mm-hmm. so that they can market and sell to people who want what they need. Because my whole thing is that there are people out there who want your offer. Mm-hmm. You've done your homework and you figured out what market you want and what your offer is. There are people who want it. How do you get them to raise their hand? Mm-hmm. Because we're in a permission-based world. You can't market and sell to people who don't want to be marketed and sold to. And people like being sold. So that's what we're doing on a membership site. The other way is in advertising. And we have not sold advertising yet. Mm-hmm. We offer free advertising to brands that we believe enhance us and we can enhance them. Yeah. And that has to do with the fact that the basic business model that we're operating is a two-sided, it's a network effect business model, is that we have to build demand and supply almost simultaneously. So we get more hosts, we get more listeners, we get more listeners, we got more hosts. And we're moving to a new data platform here, probably Segment, which is the one that we're looking at closely, to crunch the data, because to sell advertising, when we move to that, is that you're going to ask very specific questions about who's listening, when do they listen, what do they want? I guess what's the buying persona or avatar? I don't know what the latest marketing term is.
Mhm.
It changes every year, but the basis there is if you're selling advertising to somebody, then they want to know who are they going to reach. And then what you have to do is you have to set up a set of intermediate metrics, because if people say, well, I'm going to advertise because I want sales, that's not going to work because of
Mhm.
cause and effect. There are too many things in between. So if you're going to advertise, just like you're going to be a host, it could be, I want to move the needle on X on marketing. I want to double the number of connections that I have in LinkedIn. Okay,
Mhm.
that gives us a focus there. And like I said, we have a marketing agency that goes after that. So that may be a long-winded answer to the question, but you caught us kind of in the middle of our growth plan.
Yeah, no, this is great. So, just to sum up, we were talking about how are you breaking apart the radio into the different categories of how you're doing it, and there was a lot in there. So you had, podcasts is one of the physical ways that it's coming, besides just the online broadcasting. But you have listeners, you have the businesses that you're focusing on specifically. You're moving into memberships now. You have advertising, and then you have hosts. So there's plenty of different ways to create, for lack of a better word, verticals in your
Right.
radio to as either revenue or connections or again, like you said, moving the needle on what your gain that you're looking for is. Um, and that I think is something really cool because a lot of people when they think of podcasts or radio or even like video, a lot of them don't know what that return on investment is. And that's where a lot of people end because they're just like, well, I see the
Yeah.
time that I have to dedicate, but I don't see the return on it. And I think this is really good to be able to see how you're getting that return on your investment and your time. So that's really cool. Um, the last two things that we had was talking about how you're building your listeners, but also how you're creating those dollar signs. And I think I want to go into the how you're creating that dollar because we kind of already talked a little bit about it in that previous question. But like, um, I think it would just be turning into more of like we obviously know advertising. You talked about how that would eventually turn into the money, and then the host how they're getting it. Um, yeah, I think just going. I mean, memberships would obviously be subscriptions.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the only last piece would be just for clarification, like the listeners themselves. How are they particularly turning into dollar sign? Like I say dollar signs, but how are they
Yeah.
turning into
No,
that
no, no,
revenue?
agreed. You're talking to
For
other business owners here, I'm sure. So yeah, how do we monetize that? Well, the membership for the listeners, the membership is going to be how we monetize that, and it's going to be a nominal fee.
Mhm,
What we're struggling with is what the price tag is, because what a North American can afford is not what an Indian can afford or an African.
mhm,
So what we have to do is come up with a price point that works for us. We have a margin to it. At the same point, we don't price them out of the market. It's the same thing with host. Is
mhm,
that our offer for host is you get 13 weeks for $2,000 USD. So you
mhm,
get 52 podcasts. You get the potential of an ebook, because what we tell them when they do their show notes is once we've figured out you're trying to create a legacy, you're trying to get more leads into the sales funnel, or you're trying to get more sales, and we put together that 13 weeks, we say that's a book. What's
mhm.
the 13 chapters in your book? And so for the business owners, what they have now is marketing they could not afford.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though I don't come from the radio industry, I ran a radio station. I did a turnaround. That's how I got into this business. I know that we charge about one third of what you would have to, if you wanted to have your own radio show on the local radio station wherever you live, it's three times what we charge.
Mhm.
And they don't care about your advertising. If
Yeah.
the quality of your show is great, you're fine. We bring you in, you get a marketing agency, and for $2,000 over 13 weeks, you get 52 podcasts, you get the potential to have an ebook, you've got some intermediate metrics that you probably haven't thought about yet in terms of how to measure the performance of what's going on, and you simply can't buy that deal
Mhm.
anyplace else but here. So that's how we're monetizing that part of the business.
Yeah, and you're also kind of doing market research as well, because whoever ends up listening to your show ends up being the people that you could market to. So, there's definitely a lot of value in that as well. And I think that people don't think enough on figuring out exactly who their market is. They just kind of generally put it together of like, oh, males 40 to 50, who like golf are my people. It's like, well, okay, that's not detailed enough. Are they people who are competing in competitions in golf, or are they playing as a casual person? Are they, um, getting those insights is valuable in alone, and then you throw those other things on top. I think it brings all that together. But that I think that when anyone thinks of their client, they need to think of like, what can I have as that value add? What can be
Yeah.
that extra piece that's going to make me stand out?
And what we tell our host, I mean, this should not be any type of revelation. This is not the road to Damascus type of moment. Is that if you're selling to business, it's ultimately competitive advantage. How how do they become more competitive against who they're selling against with that customer base because they do business with you? It's all about competitive advantage. And when you're selling to consumers, it's all lifestyle.
Mhm,
Everything's about lifestyle. People are making statements about who they are by the clothes they wear, cars they drive, etc. And then they're making a statement to their colleagues. Okay, and you go out and you buy a Prius, you buy a
mhm,
hybrid. What statement are you making? As
yeah,
opposed to you drive a clunker. You know, you wear jeans rather than a suit. All of those are statements, and they're all lifestyle statements. We were working predominantly with businesses selling to businesses, and so we hit more on the theme of competitive advantage. But how do they sell more or lower their cost or get better margins or become more profitable because they listen to your show and then interact with you? Because what you're doing while you're on the air is you're promoting your company, and we're helping you promote it in your network, and we're promoting it in our network.
mhm, absolutely. And I think that ties nicely into the last question, which again we've kind of touched on through what we've been
Yeah.
talking about. But someone coming into building any kind of programming, and not necessarily radio, but like,
Mhm.
when you're building that listener based on everything that we kind of talked about, like, what are some things that we definitely need to keep in mind in order to build a listener base or a viewing base, or basically a following of some sort?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I have the ultimate answer to it. I can tell you what we're doing and what we're experiencing because all of you know out there that who you think you're selling to and why they're buying, you may be about 50% right when you start.
Mm-hmm.
And then it morphs over time. For example, we started as a radio station offering these services, offering the ability to get on the air. We didn't realize that our most important client is not the audience, but it's the host or the advertiser. So we had to build a marketing agency internally in order to make the radio station go. And so one of the things that happens is you got to understand is you got to put a stake in the ground, and then what type of data are you collecting? So when you're not getting the return you're looking for, how do you evaluate the data? Because a lot of times business owners are going, it ain't working. Okay, well
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty obvious. Usually it's sales or margins. And so what data are you collecting so you can diagnose to say we're missing the mark on this particular issue? And so what we would that so we kind of focus on that with the host. As far as putting together a script, I think what's really powerful one is the story. There's got to be a compelling reason to buy from you,
Mm-hmm.
and so your story as an entrepreneur is usually a great place to go. What did you do? What's the purpose behind your business? I mean, we're trying to make money, and our ultimate goal is to IPO, take this public. So I'm being real clear here. My focus
Mm-hmm.
is on money, but the reality is the most important group of people in the world are small business owners because they employ 57% of the planet. And I'm a capitalist to the core. I really believe in business. How
Mm-hmm.
do I help business owners increase the wealth of that what they have? if I worked in Africa for the UN for a while, in UNDP, and one of the things that struck me was that you look at poverty and you look at people that are poor. The challenge there is how do you affect that? You don't affect that by giving out money.
Hmm.
Yes, governments have to create infrastructure and stuff like that. But if the individual business owner can create generational wealth for themselves and their family, that's the biggest thing, is that most of those generations start from zero and then have to build out. That's pretty hard to do. But if we can help business owners create wealth for themselves and their family, and in the process of growing their company, that they can create local jobs, that is really what our mission is. Well, that appeals to a lot of people. Well, every business owner has got something like that. And that story, when I'm talking to people about why would you want to do business with us, we either begin or we end with that story, and that is really compelling. So it's your story and what purpose do you have behind the company. And then the third thing is how doing business with you will make them a better business or a better individual, depending upon who you're selling to. So those are the three things. And we map out what we think. And a lot of times with the business owners, they can't really answer those questions until we're halfway through a season and we're looking at the performance of their shows. I can tell you how many people listen. I can tell you what time they're on, how long they're on. I can tell you where around the world they are. And so you begin to get a feel for which topics create the data. And the big thing here is put a stake in the ground, come up with a way of measuring your performance. And then if it's not meeting what you thought, then adjust what you're doing. I mean, that's what you're doing with your business. That's how
Hmm.
we got from, one listener in North America and me doing 30 hours of programming a week now to 20 to 25,000 listeners. I can't tell you how many adjustments and resets that we've done in 30 months. We
Hmm.
almost every season do a reset, going, okay, that worked, that didn't. What are we going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the key that a lot of people miss, with businesses in general, because they're in the middle of it and they're kind of really focused on what's going on, especially when they're in that beginning of the business, and they forget to have that wide-eyed view, and that's where coaches like me come in, where we help you see that wide-eyed view. We help you make sure that you're focusing on the important thing, like you said, of okay, what is working, what's not working, because there's a lot of businesses that just start doing either everything, which is not the answer,
No.
or they will keep doing something thinking that it will change. And the ones that succeed are the ones that are willing to adapt or change with the times, or whatever it may be. um yeah, so that's really good. I like that.
Yeah,
um
Bill, a thought I'll add to that is here's my experience. This is my fifth startup.
hmm.
Startups are experiments.
Hmm.
You don't know what's going to work. You have a thought. Now, if you've been in the industry and this is your third company in the industry, then you got an advantage. But if you look at your startup business as an experiment, and the only thing that you focus in on is how do you improve either the customer's perception, their lifestyle, or the competitive advantage of their business, and you focus solely on what is the minimally viable offer. you know
Hmm.
and again, I think it was Reeves that talked about this a couple of years ago, is that you come up with the one thing that is the wedge that will get you in the door. These grand plans of, like us, grand plans, we're going to have membership, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We can't do any of that until we establish a base. And the base right now is listeners and hosts. Until that
Hmm.
works, all this other stuff is great. And my big thing I would tell every business owner is time of a day, pick a day in the week and a time where you do nothing but look at the business and how it's performing, and don't do any work in it, work on it. Mine is Saturday mornings. I
Hmm.
get up, I have some coffee, maybe I put a little Bailey's in it, and I look at the business going, what worked for us this week? What do I have to do next week? And if you constantly dedicate, say, 2 or 3 hours just to analyzing the business, this will get a lot easier.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think time management is a part of that too. Being able to focus on particular things at different times.
Mhm.
For most companies, it's generating those leads. What time are you doing that? And don't sacrifice that, because if you stop generating leads, then you don't have a company. So same kind of concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we definitely went through a lot of stuff. Any final thoughts before we get into some actionable steps for people who might be either looking to do some sort of advertising like this, or get into promoting themselves in this fashion, or start some sort of thing like this?
Yeah, I guess the last comment I would make that is associated with that is I find that if I time block my day, because business owners will say, well, I'm not in control of my time. Yeah, you are.
Hmm.
You allow other things to get in the way. I basically work on the business, which I include marketing and sales, is on the business until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. From
Hmm.
one until I take dinner at 6 or 7, I work in the business, the stuff that has to get done.
Yeah.
So by blocking my time, I don't pull it off every day, but it still forces me to say, okay, I'm going to analyze. Monday is finance at the station. Monday, I look at numbers. Operations is Tuesday at the station. I look at our processes. Wednesday, I look at the performance of our
Hmm.
marketing sales. So I'm using our own model. You don't have to copy that, but I block my time so that I kind of force myself. And then one of the things I evaluate on a Saturday is how well I did that. How many things that I did not do that I should have done.
Hmm.
That would be the last thing that I would add. Now,
Absolutely.
as far as the station, I would say the big thing here is let's start at the easiest part, and that is the listen. I
Hmm.
mean, just think about what we're doing. We're a radio station, but here's an analogy for you. The radio station, the broadcast tower, or the internet is the plumbing. You bring
Hmm.
plumbing into your house, but when you turn on the spigot, water should come out. Well, with us, it's business consulting. Everything that we do on this station, other than some news that we do every day, everything is about how to start, grow, or what's your exit strategy for the business. Everything we do is that. So to start with is ibgr.network and listen to some shows. Download the listener guide and begin to strategically program your time to listen to the things that uh, mean something to you. And you're going to be listening to people who are like you, who are probably a little bit beyond you in terms of their experience, and pick up on their insights and tools. And then if you're interested in promoting your business and producing the marketing collateral, then become a host. And
Hmm.
that's really where we're at. And the last one is we're building alliances because it's a network effect. Our basic business model is that the more partners that we have, and I don't mean partners like we're sharing stock, but the more partners we have is that all the marketing agency that we have here are other companies.
Hmm.
And so we're driving business to them. And so what we're doing is we're growing companies in our network, we're growing their companies.
Yeah.
And by growing their companies, they're growing our company.
Hmm.
So I would
Definitely.
say listen to the network. And if you're interested, my email address is programming at ibgr.network, programming at ibgr.network. If you're interested in anything or you just want to talk, and I'll send you a calendar link, and you can determine when you want to talk to me, and let's roll.
Cool. And I think that one other thing I want to kind of talk about as far as actionable steps is like, um, if someone's looking to start a podcast or start a radio and they're looking to get started, what is like the first thing they should focus on when thinking about creating something like this?
It would be, what story do you want to tell, and in what impact do you want that to have on whom? That would be where to start. We have our onboarding process takes 3 weeks. We don't throw people on the air. If you don't know how to do a podcast, you will be trained on how to do a podcast, because what we've done is we incorporated the best practices of writing ebooks with podcast with radio. So you learn how to do a great radio show, you'll learn how to have a great podcast, and you'll learn how to take your show notes and turn them into marketing collateral ebook. That's all built into our process.
Hmm.
So that's part of the stuff that you get that you can't get from anybody else. I don't believe. If there's somebody out there, by the way, anybody out there who says we have competitors at this, let me know, because I've been searching, because I want to model myself over people that are better than us. And right now, our competitors, on the one hand, are Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal because of the type of stories they cover, and some of the big podcasters, but nobody is doing what we're doing.
Yeah. No, it's definitely very interesting and different in the way that you've set it up. Um, so I really appreciate your time. We definitely unpacked a lot in there on radio, the benefit of it, what you can do, how you can build it, and then also about businesses and how you should be looking at your demographics and your customers and who you're trying to hit. So I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bill.
Again, Bill from IBGR. And if you're looking to do anything in radio or podcasts or learning about businesses in general, I definitely recommend reaching out. So thanks so much for watching, guys.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Everybody take care.